I'm delighted to get the opportunity to sit here on stage and remember a friend, because first and foremost that's what he was. I was 11 when I first met Jimmy Doyle, and I met him as an innocent young lad, recognised the face because I remembered him from being around my own grandfather, Johnny Leary. Specifically remember him from the funeral, shouldering Johnny Leary's coffin out of Guineaguilla Church. And I remember the day that I was carried into Buckley's Bar in Killarney, the Arbutus, and I was taken in there by my parents, Bertie and Maureen, and I remember sitting there as a child, just listening to the music. And then, of course, he recognised my parents and came over to us, and nothing would do him but for me to play a tune on the box, on his own box, and he brought me over and I played a tune with Joe Sullivan, the great Joe Sullivan, that played with him for many years and still keeps the show on the road there in Buckley's Bar. And I remember the strap in the box being about 3 times too big for me. But he said to me from there on in, the next time you're coming in here, you bring your own box and sit down there now and learn as many tunes as you want. And I suppose from there on, we developed a very, very deep friendship. You know, I suppose it was more than just music. There was just a natural link. There was generational heritage, because, of course, the Doyles were neighbours of the O'Learys in Mullacavan and Guineaguilla. They were great neighbours, and Jimmy, of course, himself often spoke to me about his relationship with a great granduncle of mine called Dan Leary, who would have been Johnny Leary's uncle, and often spoke to me about the great memories he had playing with Dan Leary, and of course the highlight being them coming up to Limerick to make that great album. And Music from the Kingdom of Kerry, it was called, and very appropriate because I think bar one track, all the rest consisted of polkas and slides, and it was just fantastic music. But I suppose when I was asked to come up here tonight as part of the Pádraig O'Keeffe Festival, and very grateful to the festival for making, you know, the appropriate space in this concert, because it's, as you all well know, it's an action-packed festival now at this stage. I mean, there's so much music here in the town of Castisland for the weekend. But to make the space just to remember one of the greats, and Jimmy certainly was that. Coming here tonight is weird in many ways, because you always associate this festival with meeting Jimmy Doyle, and he had this aura about him. Even for us that knew him, I think others used to look on him and wonder, who is this person that's after taking everyone's attention from the music in the bar? Because if Jimmy walked in, you could have the best musicians in Ireland playing, but he would just soak up everyone's attention, and they'd all look at, oh, Jimmy Doyle has landed. And he'd come in the door with a stroll about him and a wink in his eye, roguish look, and that's all you needed. And then you knew you were in for a good night. A very special character. There's something about Jimmy Doyle that I think just can't be replicated. I suppose there's countless memories, but I suppose one of the great ones was sharing the stage with him above at the Skull Sour with Willie Clancy. I remember we were in the middle of a deep session in the Westbridge in Milltown Malbay, and Eamon McGivney, one of the organisers of the great festival in Clare at the Willie Clancy, came down, and they were asking us to go down and play in the accordion recital, and maybe being two stubborn men from East Kerry, or maybe just being in the height of a good hearty session, we kind of both looked at each other and threw our head up in the air as if to say, like, what we're doing here is way better than any concert in Milltown Malbay, but we eventually put our boxes into the bag and we walked down the town, and we said the deal was we'll go up on stage and we'll play together and we'll get it done with and out of the way so that we can go back and play music together in the bar. And we did that, and I suppose it's one of the great memories, because to share the stage with Jimmy Doyle and to play with him in that setting is something that will stay with you forever. And it was very fitting that we played 2 slides. Is It the Priest You Want was the first one, and the second one was The Rain Us Up, but there were 2 slides that I would have learned from Jimmy first hand in Buckley's Bar in the Arbutus in Killarney. Of course, the one thing that has to be said about Jimmy Doyle, and I think when we remember him tonight, of course it's sad ultimately when you think of Jimmy and the fact that he's no longer with us, but his spirit will always be there, and his spirit will always be with us. And the one thing he'd always want is to have the fun element, because my God was he some crack. And like the amount of stories I got told into my ear by Jimmy Doyle, some of them I probably can't repeat, or maybe I might never again repeat, but Jesus, they're memories that you'll always hold with you. Like I say, he had the glint in his eye. I think he represented everything that's good about traditional Irish music, not just Steve Lukra music. Because first and foremost, he was an enormous player. He was an absolutely sensational player. When Jimmy Doyle played music, you stopped and you listened. And I think most people that witness Jimmy in full flow will tell you that. I've spoke to set dancers even since that has told me that Jimmy Doyle's, they've mentioned even his jig playing alone. If you were to pick any musician in Ireland that you'd want to play for a jig set or a polka, Jimmy Doyle would be the man. There was something magic in the music. But fun was always the element, and I think he always included that. There was a roguery with him that I think we'll still remember and we'll always remember. And I always liked the fact that I suppose our families were linked, and tonight is a great opportunity for me to pay my own tribute to Jimmy, but also for all of us to pay our tribute to Jimmy, because I think characters like Jimmy Doyle are the reason why this festival are still going. Because this festival started in 1993, and he played his part in getting it to the stage it's at right now, right here. We're here at a stage where the Padraig O'Keeffe is flourishing massively. We're lucky enough to see that the best musicians in Ireland are here in the town of Castleisland in County Kerry, and he played a huge role in that. And I think it's important to remember that. The other thing I suppose I would say is that his good wife Joan is here tonight. I met her earlier, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to welcome Joan and welcome all the Doyle family here tonight to Castleisland. I remember calling over to Jib, or Mullakivan as it's properly titled, a Good Friday, because I was lucky enough to be given the job of presenting a night in honour of Jimmy Doyle at the Handed Down in Scartaglen, hosted by PJ Tehan, and it's a great chance as well to salute PJ for the great work he does in preserving Steve Lukra music. And PJ obviously knew I was linked with Jimmy Doyle, but gave me the role, and it's something I'll always remember. And obviously I would like to take this opportunity as well to commend to PJ on all the great work, and he's such a deserving recipient of the Padraig O'Keeffe Award tonight. But I suppose that night in particular, Jimmy was in great form, and it was just a fantastic experience again that I was lucky enough to do, and even witness Jimmy in action with his good friend, the late great Jimmy O'Brien, on stage. A great friend of his. Of course, Jimmy played for many years in Jimmy O'Brien's bar in Killarney with the likes of Dan Leary and many other local musicians, and that's another personal highlight for me. I suppose when it comes to music and when it comes to Steve Lucre, I think Jimmy Doyle's name will always be mentioned, because he passed something on much purer than just the music alone. It was a characteristic. It was the way of doing things. It was a session etiquette. It was learning to respect your fellow musician in a session, learning to compliment your fellow musician in a session, and learning to learn music in the right way and in the purest way. And I think it's something that should never go unnoticed, because he had a warm welcome for everyone that came into his session. There was no one excluded from a session with Jimmy Doyle. And I just think even to this day there's so many examples of musicians that are going to be playing here at this festival that were associated with Jimmy Doyle and that would have learned music from him. And if you pause and just look at their demeanour, they'll probably all have those characteristics of people that were lucky enough to play with Jimmy, but also observe his mannerisms. There was always room for people. There was never so much talk of being excluded or anything like that. You were always welcome, and Jimmy Doyle was always a man that put music before the man. If it meant his own music had to suffer, so be it. The young people got their chance, and he'd take a backward step. And I think that's a testament to the great Jimmy Doyle. So I suppose I'll play a few tunes now at this stage. But I suppose playing a few tunes that maybe might be linked to Jimmy. The first jig anyway is a tune called Contigos, and I was talking to his wife Joan about this earlier. He used to always say to me that this was the first tune he ever learned from my own grandfather Johnny Leary, and he said he always thought he was made because it was the first tune he learned to cross the keys in the accordion. That was a big deal. So when he learned this jig, he said he thought he'd really hit the big time. The second jig then is a lovely tune that he recorded many years ago, like I say, with his great neighbour and friend Dan Leary, who he soldiered with for many years. They recorded this in Jimmy Bryan's bar in Killarney. The great Kieran McMahon would have recorded it, and it's a version of The Boys at Tangerine, a well-known tune, but Jimmy told me that this was a jig he learned directly from Dan Leary, and of course Dan was a pupil of the great Steve Lucre fiddlemaster Tom Billy Murphy from Ballydesmond, so I suppose you could say it's a jig directly linked to Tom Billy Murphy. So I hope you enjoy. So I suppose continuing on with tunes I suppose I'd associate with him, there's many of them, but I suppose I was trying to pick a few that might be older tunes and things like that. So these are a few polkas next. The first one is the Last Chance polka, and again he was telling me the story about that when I spent a Good Friday actually behind a jib with himself and Joan, and fair play to Joan, gee, the world of sandwiches made for us. The chunkiest ham sandwiches I've ever come across in my life on Good Friday. Jesus, Jimmy was delighted with him anyway, but he was telling me about the Last Chance polka because they went to Limerick obviously to record their album, and Dan Leary ended up putting down that track as a solo track, and he'd learned that again from Tom Biddy. But the first time I learned that tune was at the gathering. I was a young lad at the concert, and Jimmy and Joe Sullivan, and my aunt Ellen, and Liam Riley, a neighbour of Jimmy's, a great friend of Jimmy's, I think, and Paddy Gleeson, they would have gone up on stage on the Thursday night of the gathering for many years. And because I remember being up at the bar and Ellen was going through the set list with all of them, because they asked Ellen to make out a kind of a rough set list of what they were going to play up on stage. They were playing it all by ear as usual, and Ellen had said we play the Last Chance polka, and I think they actually meant to play it in the key of A minor, which would be the normal key for it. But when Ellen said to Jimmy, we'll do the Last Chance, and they were going into that set, he naturally started it in E minor. And it was technically, we'd say, a mistake on the night, but they played it in E minor. So I learned it in E minor, and it's very nice in E minor. So I play it that way since. But that's my memory of learning the Last Chance polka, so that's the first one I'll play. The second one then is a tune that Jimmy always associated with his mother, Julia Doyle, and he used to tell me that he used to remember hearing her play it on the fiddle, and he'd say she'd be screeching on the fiddle playing it. She was a pupil of Tom Biddy Murphy, and he used to often play that tune, great tune as well, again related to Tom Biddy Murphy. And just for the night that's in it then, I was lying idle there one night last weekend, and a tune was going around in my head, and I said I'd dedicate it to Jimmy. So it is a new polka, we'll call it. But I was trying to think of a proper title for it, and you know, when you'd be growing up learning music from Jimmy Doyle inside the Arbutus, and if you were playing good, he'd come around you and he might catch you by the back of the neck and he'd say, "You're an enchanted hero." And I wrote this polka last week, and we'll call it The Enchanted Hero. Jimmy.